being a pirate in the 1700s wasn't all about plundering treasure and fighting duels. No, most of the time, pirates were desperately trying to keep their ships afloat in the middle of a storm after a battle, or simply on long voyages. The truth is, pirate ships were constantly in need of repairs. Whether it was from a cannonball ripping through the hull or damage from months of constant wear and tear, pirates had to become experts in making do with whatever they could find. And unlike today's tech-savvy sailors, who can rely on a fleet of specialists and modern equipment, pirates had only their wits and whatever they could steal to fix their ships. Imagine this. You're in the middle of a battle. Cannonballs are flying everywhere, the ship's rocking like a wild carnival ride, and suddenly, boom, one of those cannonballs hits the hull. Now, your ship is sinking faster than your chances of making it to Treasure Island. But that's where pirates were forced to think fast. They couldn't exactly call a shipyard, and they certainly didn't have a toolbox with every tool imaginable. What they had were quick hands, plenty of grit, and a whole lot of creativity. Anything that could stop the water from pouring in became more valuable than gold. The first rule of pirate repairs: make do with what you've got, and make it fast. And this was no one-off event. The truth is, pirate ships, particularly during the golden age of piracy, were constantly breaking down or taking on water. It's not like they had all the modern comforts of ship maintenance we enjoy today. So these pirates didn't have much of a choice but to adapt, and quickly. They learned to patch up their ships with whatever they could lay their hands on. And even when they had all their wits about them, they weren't guaranteed success. Fixing holes while dodging cannonballs? Now that's a skill in itself. Old age wisdom says, necessity is the mother of invention. And pirates proved this every time their ships took damage. With a constant threat of sinking, pirates were forced to get creative with repairs, and their resourcefulness ensured that they could stay afloat literally through some of the toughest situations. Now, let's talk about one of the most common and immediate threats pirates faced on the open sea: cannonball damage. When you're in the middle of a battle and a cannonball rips through the hull of your ship, you don't exactly have time to consider your options. The water starts rushing in, and you gotta act fast. Pirates weren't exactly equipped with high-tech repair tools or shipyards. Instead, they relied on quick thinking and whatever they had on hand to plug the holes before they sank. One of the go-to fixes in these situations was stuffing holes with anything that could create a seal. And I mean anything. Old shirts, for instance, yes, the same ones pirates wore, would sometimes end up being shoved into cannonball breaches. Imagine a pirate crew frantically tearing apart their captain's prized silk shirts to save their ship. The captain might not have been too thrilled about his wardrobe becoming fish food, but hey, at least the crew lived to plunder another day. Desperate times, desperate measures, right? Another common solution was using oakum, which was old rope fiber soaked in tar. This was one of the most effective ways pirates kept water out in the short term. The tar made it waterproof, and the rope fibers expanded when wet, creating a temporary seal that could hold off the flooding long enough to get to safety. Pirates kept a good supply of this stuff on hand because, in their world, holes in the ship were about as common as bad breath after a hearty meal of salted fish. When the damage was below the waterline, things got even trickier. Pirates had to be quick on their feet and resourceful. They would sometimes drag tar-covered sails under the ship like an underwater band-aid, hoping the pressure of the water would press the fabric against the hull, sealing the breach. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't glamorous, but it worked well enough to keep the ship afloat for the time being. As chaotic as it sounds, these were the kinds of repairs pirates had to deal with while under fire. And you gotta admit, there's something impressive about their ability to MacGyver their way through those situations. Not to mention, it was essential for survival. Without these quick fixes, they wouldn't have made it past the first round of cannonballs. If the battle wasn't enough, pirate ships were also constantly facing wear and tear on long voyages, especially with the damage occurring below the waterline. The ocean is an unforgiving environment, and as much as pirates would love to sail smoothly along without any problems, that wasn't in the cards. When the ship got damaged beneath the water, they had to get creative and fast. One of the most dangerous fixes pirates had to deal with was repairing holes below the waterline. If water was flooding the hull and they couldn't patch it in time, the whole ship could go under. To deal with this, pirates would use tar-covered sails or animal fat to patch things up, dragging these massive sticky sails under the ship like makeshift band-aids. I know it sounds strange, but think of it this way. When you're out there in the middle of the ocean with your life on the line, you'll try anything to stop the water from pouring in. The pressure of the water would help push the tar-covered fabric tightly against the hull, creating a temporary seal that kept things afloat. Of course, it wasn't perfect, but it bought them time they desperately needed to get to safety or make further repairs. But not all repairs were done underwater. For the holes above the waterline, pirates had to act fast and use whatever was available. Wooden planks were nailed over the breaches and sealed with tar. Pirates were turned into amateur carpenters on the fly, fixing holes in the ship as fast as they could while everything was falling apart around them. Cannonballs were still flying, the ship was still rocking in the waves, and if they didn't get those boards in place, the ship would go down. The pressure to act fast in these situations must have been incredible, and yet, somehow, they made it work. Pirates were masters of improvisation. Whether it was stuffing a hole with an old shirt, using tar-covered sails to stop leaks below the waterline, or nailing wooden planks into place, they found a way to keep their ships afloat. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't always safe, but it was effective. Their resourcefulness in the face of danger is one of the reasons pirates are remembered so fondly in popular culture today. When it comes to dealing with smaller hulls or more persistent leaks, pirates really show just how inventive they could be. I mean, you've got to hand it to them. When life gives you holes in your ship, you make do with whatever you can find, right? One of the most bizarre yet effective solutions pirates came up with was using bread. Yep, you heard that right. Pirates would sometimes use bread to patch up leaks. It may sound like a joke, but bread actually has a unique property: it swells when wet. So when a pirate found a small hole, they'd simply toss a loaf of bread in, and bam, the bread would swell up, plugging the hole temporarily. Now, I'm not sure who was the first pirate to think of this, but they definitely deserve a medal for thinking outside the box, or should I say, loaf? Of course, bread wasn't going to solve all their problems, especially when it came to larger breaches in the hull or critical parts of the ship that needed major repairs. That's where the real challenges came in. Masts were essential for sailing, and if a mast broke during a battle or a storm, pirates were in big trouble. Masts were huge, towering structures, often weighing as much as 3 elephants. When they broke, they didn't just snap quietly, they came down with a crash. Replacing a mast wasn't an option during long voyages because spare masts took up too much space that was better used for, well, treasure and rum. So pirates had to get creative with how they fixed them. The most common method was splicing. Imagine trying to fix a broken wooden pole without a proper saw or tools. Pirates would align the broken ends of the mast and wrap them with ropes. To make the splice even tighter, they'd heat the ropes, causing them to shrink as they cooled, which gave the splice a much stronger grip. If they were lucky enough to have metal hoops on board, they'd hammer those around the splice to make it even more secure, almost like giving the mast a cast. But here's the catch. One wrong move, and the whole thing could collapse, taking down half the rigging with it. It was a high-risk repair, and you really didn't want to be the pirate who botched it. Sails, of course, were another huge concern. They were like the wings of the ship, catching the wind to move them forward, and if they tore during a battle or a storm, it could cripple the ship. Repairing sails was no easy task. Pirates used thick, wax thread and enormous needles. But trying to stitch sails while the ship was rocking in a storm, that's like trying to sew on a roller coaster. The wind, the waves, the cannonballs, everything was working against them. But somehow, they got it done. If the sails were beyond repair, pirates got resourceful. They would cut up old sails and use the fabric for other things: clothing, bags, even temporary shelters when they landed on shore. The ability to recycle materials in the middle of nowhere shows just how practical and resourceful pirates really were. If nothing else, they were survivors. Pirates were never just fighting battles on the high seas. They were also fighting the constant wear and tear on their ships. One of the major issues they faced wasn't just patches and repairs, it was keeping the ship steered in the right direction. A ship without control is like trying to drive a car with no steering wheel. Good luck with that. The rudder, That massive wooden paddle at the back of the ship was the key to steering, and when it broke, pirates faced a serious crisis. The problem with a broken rudder was that it left the ship completely directionless. Now, in the heat of battle or a storm, that's not something you can afford to deal with. To solve this, pirates invented the jury rudder. This makeshift solution was basically a big wooden plank tied to the ship with ropes. Think of it as a pirate's version of duct tape, a quick fix, but definitely not elegant. Getting this jury rudder to work was tricky. It wasn't like just slapping it on and hoping for the best. Pirates had to coordinate the crew, sometimes 6 or more men, to control it, almost like a ragtag crew trying to operate a mechanical bull. It was hard work, but it did the trick. However, steering was still anything but precise. More often than not, the ship would drift off course, and pirates would have to adjust course as best they could. The real issue came when they were forced to battle the sea and the leaks in the ship. Every wooden ship took on water, sometimes as much as 200 gallons a day. You can imagine the stress when the ship was already compromised, and now you had to fight the constant flooding as well. Pirates weren't sitting in comfort while sipping rum, they were working non-stop to keep the ship dry. The solution to the leaks was caulking. Pirates would push oakum, made from old rope fibers soaked in tar, into the cracks between the planks to stop the water from seeping in. But, and here's the fun part, that tar got everywhere. Pirates would end up looking like they had been dipped in a vat of molasses. And let's just say, it didn't exactly wash off easily. The whole caulking process was messy, exhausting work, and with every leak they plugged, another one would appear somewhere else. It was like playing a game of whack, a mole plug, one hole, and another would pop up. Still, it was better than letting the ship sink, and pirates learned quickly to keep a constant eye on every crack and crevice. But what happens when all the caulking in the world isn't enough? When the leaks became too much to handle and the ship couldn't stay afloat much longer, pirates had one drastic solution: canning. This was a last-ditch effort to keep the ship from sinking. It's a process where the pirates deliberately ran the ship onto a sandbar or beach during high tide. Once the tide went out, the ship would lean to one side, exposing the hull and all the damage, much like a whale sunbathing on the shore. It wasn't exactly the most graceful option, but it gave the crew a chance to repair the ship away from the dangerous deep waters. The exposed part of the hull could be patched up, and any leaks that had gotten out of control could be dealt with on land. Of course, this fix wasn't without its own set of risks. Being stuck on a beach or sandbar made pirates sitting ducks for enemy ships. If another pirate crew or the British Navy spotted them, it was game over. So while pirates were working on repairs, there was always a lookout posted, keeping a sharp eye on the horizon. And let's face it, keeping calm while you're stuck on the beach with your ship exposed to potential attack is probably the last place you want to be. But sometimes it was the only option. Now, let's talk about something else that pirates often faced on the high seas: the constant threat of barnacles, seaweed, and shipworms. These critters were like little parasites that latched onto the hull and caused slow but steady damage to the wood. Over time, these marine creatures could seriously compromise the ship's integrity, making it weaker and more vulnerable to leaks. Pirates needed to deal with this issue regularly, and the solution was a lot of scraping. They would have to clear off all the barnacles and sea creatures from the hull, sometimes collecting up to 2 tons of barnacles in one go. Once everything was scraped clean, they would check the hull for damage. If there were cracks or weak spots, they'd repair them, applying fresh oakum and tar to ensure the ship stayed watertight. But the thing about canning is that it wasn't a perfect fix. Pirates would make the repairs, but there was always a looming fear that it wouldn't hold up in a storm. And so, the cycle of repairs continued: patching, scraping, and recalking, often under the threat of enemy ships or dangerous weather conditions. Even with their resourcefulness and relentless efforts, pirates couldn't afford to be complacent. One mistake or poorly executed repair could spell the end of their ship and their pirating days. Still, these repairs weren't just about keeping the ship afloat. They were a testament to the ingenuity of pirates. They didn't have the resources of modern-day sailors, but they made do with what they had. They understood that keeping the ship running was crucial to their survival, so they became masters of ship maintenance using whatever means necessary to stay afloat and continue their adventures. Now, let's dive into the nuts and bolts of how pirates truly kept their ships going, even when the sails weren't exactly in the best shape. When you are a pirate, your sails are more than just fabric, they're your ticket to freedom, your lifeline to the high seas. A torn sail could mean the difference between escape and capture. And yet, pirate ships weren't exactly the best equipped vessels. So when the sails started to fray or tear, pirates had to rely on their wits and whatever materials they had on hand to fix them. Sail repairs were no easy task. Imagine trying to patch up a massive sail that covers as much space as 3 tennis courts while being pelted by the wind and rain, all while the ship is pitching back and forth on the waves. Yeah, it wasn't a job for the faint of heart. Pirates used thick, wax thread and needles that were practically the size of small swords. The stitching had to be precise, and it had to hold because one mistake could leave a hole that might tear open even bigger during a storm or battle. The wind had its own plans, of course, making the entire process feel like trying to sew a blanket on a roller coaster. Let's not forget the real heroes in these situations, the pirates who had to handle the heavy-duty sewing needles. The thread they used wasn't your typical sewing kit variety. It was thick, waxed, and could hold up in wet conditions. And the best part? Pirates often coated the thread in tar to make it even more waterproof. But the needles were the true weapons of the trade. Imagine trying to shove a needle as big as a small dagger through thick canvas, while the ship is heaving back and forth. It's like trying to thread a needle while riding a mechanical bull, except the bull is in the middle of the ocean. In addition to repairing sails, pirates were also masters of repurposing fabric. If a sail couldn't be saved, pirates would cut it up and reuse the material for other purposes. Old sails could be turned to clothing, bags, or even makeshift shelters when they docked. Pirates were resourceful like that. They didn't throw anything away. What was once a torn sail could become a bag to hold treasure or a blanket to keep warm on a cold night. When you live life on the edge, you learn how to make the most of everything. And pirates were no exception. Now, here's a quirky fact that might surprise you. Did you know that some pirates were so skilled at sail repairs that they could actually identify other pirate ships based on their sail repairs? Yeah, pirates could recognize each other by the stitching patterns. It's like criminal fingerprinting, but with fabric. If you spotted a ship with a poorly done repair on the sails, chances were it was one of Captain Blackbeard's ships. Imagine looking through a spyglass and saying, "Yep, that's definitely my old buddy, Captain Johnson. He never could stitch a straight line." In the end, pirates weren't just skilled in battle. They were craftsmen, seamstresses, and repairmen all rolled into one. They had to be, in order to keep their ships sailing and their adventures alive. The next time you think about pirates, remember that their lives were built not just on treasure hunting, but on survival, creativity, and an unrelenting desire to keep moving forward no matter the challenges. Let's wrap this up by talking about one of the most frustrating and challenging problems pirates faced: rudder failure. The rudder, that big wooden paddle at the back of the ship, was what allowed the pirates to steer their vessel. Without it, the ship was, quite literally, at sea. Losing control of the ship could turn a pirate crew from hunters into prey in the blink of an eye. Imagine being in the middle of a storm or a battle, and suddenly the rudder breaks. You're stuck, drifting aimlessly, hoping that the wind doesn't push you straight into enemy hands. And the worst part? The rudder was one of the most common points of failure, accounting for around 40% of shipwrecks during the 1700s. That's right, almost half of all shipwrecks could be traced back to rudder issues. When the rudder failed, pirates had to think fast. Their solution? The Drew rudder, a makeshift fix that involved tying a large wooden plank to the stern with ropes. This rudder was nowhere near as reliable as the original. It was more like trying to steer a ship with a giant board attached to the back. It required at least 6 pirates to coordinate their efforts and operate it. It wasn't an elegant solution, but it worked in a pinch, though steering was far from precise. The ship would often drift off, of course, and pirates had to rely on their wits and quick thinking to try to adjust their heading. Now, with a broken rudder and the jury rudder in place, the pirates would also have to deal with constant leaks. Wooden ships were notorious for taking on water. In fact, Pirate ships typically took in about 200 gallons of water a day. Keeping the ship from sinking wasn't just about plugging one hole. It was an ongoing battle. To fight back, pirates used a technique called caulking, which involved pushing oakum, a material made of old rope fibers soaked in tar, into the cracks between the wooden planks of the hull. This would stop the water from seeping in, at least temporarily. The process was messy, as the tar would get everywhere, covering the pirates like they had been dipped in black molasses. But when you're sinking, you don't have the luxury of worrying about a little mess. Pirates also knew that these repairs weren't permanent. Every time they patched up a leak, they were just buying more time to either reach a safe port or to fight another battle. The leaks never stopped completely. That's why they would constantly check for new cracks, recaulking and patching whenever necessary. And when the damage was beyond repair, pirates would have to resort to beaching their ship, or canning, which was another risky move. The pirates would intentionally run their ship onto a sandbar during high tide, then wait for the tide to go out, exposing the hull for repairs. This wasn't exactly the safest method. It made the ship vulnerable to attack, but sometimes it was their only option. Despite the constant threats of damage and the dangerous nature of the repairs, pirates always found ways to keep their ships afloat. Whether it was fixing holes with shirts, bread, or animal fat, or using makeshift tools to mend broken masts and rudders, pirates proved time and time again that ingenuity, resourcefulness, and a little bit of luck were the keys to survival. They had no fancy tools or modern tech to help them, but they made do with whatever they could find. And in a world where everything could change in an instant, these quick fixes were what kept their ships and their pirating careers on course.